So, of course, we're looking at the Professional Diploma in Accounting Synoptic Assessment. This is very exciting since the change in syllabus for AQ 2016. The Synoptic Assessment is something which is new. Synoptic is this word first came out when the syllabus was being launched, and lots of people not very sure what this was all about. It's really an assessment that's designed to consider your learning across the whole of the syllabus for the whole of the qualification. So it's our endpoint assessment that's pulling all of your knowledge together in one place. Through this webinar, we're going to introduce the Level 4 Synoptic Assessment. We're going to have a look at what it's about, what's included in it, and hopefully I'm going to be able to help you with some guidance on how to prepare for your Synoptic Assessment when you come to sit it. So first of all, we'll just have a look at the Level 4 Professional Diploma in Accounting qualification. Now, we've got our core units. We've got our financial statements of limited companies, management accounting budgeting, management accounting decision and control, and accounting systems and control. Now, these 4 papers are all assessed in this Synoptic assessment that you sit right at the end. In order to schedule and sit your Synoptic assessment, you must have at least attempted the exams for those other 3 core units, so the budgeting, decision and control, and financial statements of limited companies. You don't have to have received your results, you don't have to have passed these units, but you must have attempted those individual unit assessments. So all 3 of those papers have got their own individual unit assessment. Hopefully there's a few of you who are sitting soon, so hopefully you've passed all of those 3 units already, or be waiting for your results. And the accounting systems and control, which is also a full unit in itself, is only assessed as part of the Synoptic assessment. It has no individual unit assessment of its own. So we just need to bear that in mind, that this whole unit is being assessed only in this place. So there's going to be quite a lot of emphasis on these accounting systems and controls, as well as picking up on knowledge on those other 3 core papers. We've also got the optional papers at Level 4 here, business tax, personal tax, credit management, external auditing, and cash and treasury management. Hopefully you've all chosen your optional papers. You don't have to have sat the optional papers before you do the endpoint assessment. None of these optional papers are tested through the endpoint assessment at all. Some of them, if you are looking at choosing certain optional papers, they can be beneficial to do them before the Synoptic assessment. Business tax and personal tax are completely irrelevant to the Synoptic. There's nothing in there. I've just noticed a couple of you are mentioning that you have to have passed the exam before you can do your Synoptic paper. This will go with wherever it is you're studying, there may be kind of policies that they've got in place that they want you to have passed before you sit the Synoptic paper. From a scheduling point of view, from the AAT point of view, we can only schedule the assessment if you have attempted those papers before. Now, personally, I would not suggest that you do sit the Synoptic assessment unless you have passed those other individual units, because all of that knowledge is going to be passed through the Synoptic. But it is possible to schedule the assessment whilst you're still waiting for the results from those, or waiting to resit those. So you will have to just check with your training provider whether they're going to allow you to sit the Synoptic before those results have come through. So the optional papers, business tax and personal tax, have no relevance on the Synoptic assessment at all. External auditing, the actual content of the syllabus for external auditing has some overlap with accounting systems and controls. If you are looking at sitting external auditing as one of your optional papers, it's definitely worth doing that before you sit the Synoptic. It's going to be beneficial to you. Likewise, credit management and cash and treasury management, not to quite as much of an extent, but the knowledge in those papers can also be beneficial through that Synoptic assessment as well. What's the Synoptic assessment all about? So the Synoptic assessment understands or tests the understanding of the different topics that are covered across the qualification. And it's testing you on how those individual units integrate together. We've got our financial accounting and we've got our management accounting. And the accounts department, all of the tasks and activities that are undertaken by the accounts department are relevant from a financial and a management accounting point of view. And the Synoptic assessment really tests how these two integrate into each other. The Synoptic assessment is very much based around these accounting systems and controls. Our accounting systems will gather information and provide information from a financial and a management accounting point of view. Hence, it links into those other units. The accounting systems and control unit has a focus on internal controls, and we'll have a look at that in a little bit more detail in a moment. So as we've mentioned here, this is really just covering what was in that diagram we saw before. Management accounting, budgeting, decision and control, and financial statements of limited companies have their own individual assessment as well as being part of the Synoptic. Optional units are not tested as part of the Synoptic assessment, but doing external auditing, if that's one of your options that you're going to do before, can be beneficial. So the Synoptic assessment is a 3-hour computer-based assessment. It's delivered through Secure Assess, so through the same platform as you will have sat all of your other assessments. You will start with the introduction. Lots of information is given to you right at the start of the assessment, which you must make sure that you read. It will give you instructions as to the information that will be available to you in pop-up windows, plus the timings and stuff like that. The assessment is humanly marked or partially humanly marked, so all of our level 4 assessments, the results take up to 6 weeks. And you receive your results directly from the AAT. There's a few computer-marked parts, but there's a significant amount of this paper that will be humanly marked, that are written discursive questions. And as with all of our assessments, competency is set at 70%. Now, this is a really important slide. This is our learning outcomes. So this is what the Synoptic assessment is testing of you. We'll just have a look through these 4 learning outcomes and explain them in a little bit more detail. So the first one here, demonstrate an understanding of the role and responsibilities of the accounting function within the organisation. This learning outcome is making us think about what is it that the accounting function do. They provide information to other people within and outside of the organisation. They also receive information from other departments. The accounting function will help to make decisions which are going to have an impact on other departments. Decisions that are made may well have an impact on the production department, the purchasing department, sales. There's investment decisions that are being made. There's decisions that will be made which will affect the processes and the systems of control that are within the organisation. The accounting function will also provide information to other functions that will enable them to make decisions. So we're going to be tested on how we integrate with those other functions and the kind of decisions that we would have an impact on, and also the decisions that we make, how they'll affect the rest of the organisation. The accounting function also needs to comply with regulations and standards. So we've got our financial statements of limited companies coming in there for our regulatory requirements. Second learning outcome is to evaluate the internal control systems. Now, internal control systems, these are the processes and procedures that we have in place to detect and prevent fraud and error. These are really, really important within an organisation. So things like authorisation procedures that we have in place. Let's take the purchasing department. When the purchasing department receive a purchase order through from production, that purchase order needs to have been approved before those goods can be ordered. That's a check that we have in place to make sure that we're not buying goods that aren't needed, and to make sure that a member of staff isn't ordering goods that they're then going to take away for their own personal purposes. Having different people involved, perhaps in dealing with the cash in an organisation. One person is responsible for raising the invoices, another person responsible for receiving the funds, and another person responsible for reconciliations. That means that we've got a number of checks in place to make sure that there is no fraud or error. So we're going to be tested on our understanding of internal controls. We'll be tested on ensuring that there are sufficient internal controls in place within the organisation. And we'll also be looking at how the internal control systems can be improved, where there's weaknesses, making recommendations. So the learning outcome 2 is a really important outcome, and there's quite a lot of focus on that learning outcome 2 in the Synoptic assessment. Number 3, evaluate an organisation's accounting system and underpinning procedures. This is where we'll be looking at the organisation's accounting system and saying, yep, that's what's good. That's where the strengths are in their accounting system. That's where they've got good internal controls. That's where they've got good procedures and systems in place, and we can rely on the information that comes out of them. We'll also be looking for where there are weaknesses. So this is where things need to be improved. This is where there is the potential for fraud and error. This is where procedures are lacking. There aren't the processes in place that are needed. So we will evaluate an organisation's accounting system. Evaluate is a really interesting word. Evaluate is not just looking at something and analysing it. It's looking at how good it is or how bad it is. So is that just a small weakness that could cause us small issues? Or is that a really big weakness that could have a significant impact on that information that comes out of our accounting system? And the last one we have here is analyse recommendations made to improve an organisation's accounting system. Now, this isn't just analysing recommendations. We could see that you are asked to make suggestions for improvements. So you've identified some weaknesses. What can we do to improve and overcome those weaknesses? So you may be asked to make recommendations. You also need to be able to think about the impact of recommendations, whether they're ones that are suggested in a scenario or whether they're ones that you've identified as recommendations. What is the impact of them? What's going to be the cost impact? What's going to be the impact on the organisation? What's going to need to change? Perhaps people, systems, processes and procedures that we have in place might all need to change. We'll also need to think about the impact on people within the organisation, additional training that might be needed, additional skills that are required, or more staff being required in order for these recommendations to work. So those are our learning outcomes. Really important to bear those in mind when you're doing your revision for the exam. This is what you're going to be tested on, so you need to make sure that you're thinking about your knowledge in terms of these learning outcomes and what you're being able to prove that you're achieving through this exam. or you understand. So this next slide I've got here is a list of the kinds of things that you might be tested on. This is by no means a definitive list. There are many other things that you could be tested on, but these are just some ideas. So we'll briefly talk through them. I won't spend too much time on each of them, but show an understanding of the role of the accounting function in the organisation, how it interacts with other departments, the information they receive, supply, and the impact of decisions that they make. The importance of internal controls in minimising the risk of loss. So how do our internal controls protect our organisation to make sure that there isn't fraud and error, and that goods or cash isn't being taken or lost from the organisation. An evaluation of an accounting system to identify weaknesses and how those weaknesses impact on the organisation. So where do we have weaknesses? Where are we not efficient? Where is there the potential for fraud? Where is there a lack of internal control? What could that mean for the organisation? What are the risks that the organisation are facing? Is there a risk that cash may be misappropriated? Is there a risk that non-current assets might be taken from the organisation? Is there a risk that our trade receivables are understated and we don't chase for that money and get it from our customers? So we might need to identify weaknesses and see how we address them. Making recommendations. There's a mention of having regard for the costs and benefits of our recommendations. If we're making a recommendation, we want the benefits to outweigh the costs. Otherwise, is the organisation really going to implement whatever we're recommended? The sustainability and the impact of those recommendations on users of the accounting system. Are they going to benefit from it? Is there going to be an additional cost? Is there going to be a motivational impact? Are we going to need training of staff? We're kind of considering the big picture in an organisation. Anything we're recommending, who's it going to have an impact on? What's the good and the bad that's going to come out of it? Consolidate and apply the knowledge that you've gained from the mandatory units. Bearing in mind recommendations that you're making, you've got to comply with your accounting standards. So you need to be making sure that you do. We've got our performance measurement that comes from all three of those core papers. You'll be calculating ratios in financial statements, budgeting, decision and control. We see them all over the place. Ratios are going to be tested again in this paper, and we appreciate that it's the information from financial and management accounting point of view that we use for calculating these ratios. Review a planned change in policy, identify problems within a system, and what will happen if we're changing it. If we've got a change in policy, what impact will that have on staff, our systems, the information that's available to us? We've already mentioned this about making recommendations to improve our accounting system. This is where you're asked to demonstrate your problem-solving skills. We found a weakness. How can we make that better? And having a sound understanding of management accounting and our financial accounting information requirements, and how both areas need each other. There's an overlap in information. If we're complying with accounting standards, if we've got the systems and processes in place that are needed from a financial accounting point of view to comply with those standards, that improves the information that's available from a management accounting point of view as well. Remember the differences in the financial and management accounting. The financial accounting, we're complying with those regulatory requirements, external focus for where the information is provided. From a management accounting point of view, we're looking internally at making decisions and providing information to users within the organisation. So hopefully that gives you a few ideas on the kind of things that are being tested. We will have a little talk in a moment about other things that might be tested as well. So hopefully you are all aware of the pre-release material that you get for the Synoptic assessment. So this is something that's very new for the AAT. We haven't had this before. There is a pre-release scenario, some information that you're given prior to the exam that you are expected to know, understand, have read through, have analysed, and it gives you background and information on the organisation that you're going to be tested on. The pre-release material is available. It's if you log into your My AAT accounts, under the study resources, you can access the pre-release material. Now there are two lots of pre-release material available. You've got some which is available for the sample assessments, and then you've got the live pre-release material. The sample assessments on the AAT's website are not based on your live scenario. So they are of limited use. You can use the pre-release material for the sample assessments and go through the sample assessments to give you an idea of the types of questions you could be asked, the amount of detail you're expected to go into, and the format and presentation of the exam. But the pre-release material that you'll be tested on the exam is the live version. So why are you giving it? You're given the pre-release material to enable you to have an understanding of the background of an organisation, to be able to really absorb yourself into that organisation and be able to make decisions and prepare answers to questions as if that was the organisation that you work for. We'll have a look at the pre-release material in a moment, but just a reminder, or just to let you know how you'll receive the pre-release material. Before the assessment, you can go onto My AAT, download it, work through it, make notes over it, highlight it, and really engross yourself in it and understand it. You're not allowed to take your copy into the exam, but there will be a pop-up window with the pre-release material on it in the exam, so you will be able to access it at any time. What should you do with this pre-release material before the exam? Well, read it. Read it a good number of times. Really familiarise yourself with the organisation and know it as if you worked there. So know who all the people are, know the kind of industry they work within, the sorts of costs that they'll have incurred, and how their systems work. Familiarise yourself with the industry. So outside of that pre-release material that's given, have a think about the industry that they're operating in. Maybe even do a little bit of research so you understand their cost structures, the kind of costs that they incur, the kind of market that they operate within. So you really feel like you understand the business. I would definitely suggest working through the management accounting papers, going through your course notes that you've received for them, and for each technique or concept that you come across in your course notes, think about how does this apply to the scenario in my pre-release. Things like come across benchmarking, product life cycle, value analysis, all of these topics that you'll see in your course notes. Think about how relevant are they to this scenario. How might I be tested on this? How useful might that technique be to this organisation? You're given financial information. You need to review through that information, think about the ratios that could be calculated, maybe even have a go at calculating some of them, so you can really think about how does this business perform? What's their position like? Are they in a good, strong position? Are they looking at growing for the future? Could they have potential issues? Have they got much cash? How have they performed in the last period? Also think about, from your financial statements of limited companies point of view, which standards are of interest, which ones are most appropriate for this scenario that you've been given. Are they likely to be holding much inventory? What's my inventory standard? What are the conditions of it? What do I need to think about I could have to apply? I would also suggest doing a SWOT analysis. Think about the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats that you can identify in that pre-release material. Now, in the assessment, you'll be given a whole load of additional information. There will be some unseen materials to go with these pre-seen materials. So there will be more strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats to be identified from information that's only given in the exam, but you can prepare yourself well by going through that pre-release material. Think about what recommendations you might make in relation to any weaknesses that you've identified, and think about the people in the organisation, and think about any recommendations that you might be making. How might it affect those people? So we're going to have a very brief look at the pre-release materials. So bear with me whilst I share this on the screen. Can I just check, can you see the pre-release for live assessments in front of you, if someone wouldn't mind letting me know? That's great. Lovely, the technology works. I can't tell from my screen whether it has shared an additional document with you, so that's great. We've got, and this is the pre-release material that's come from the AAT website, and we're just going to have a brief look through it. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller so I can scroll through it better. Now, as far as we are aware, this pre-release scenario that we've been given here, which is Green Print Limited, this is going to be tested for, as the pre-release material, the scenario for the exam for the foreseeable future. It may well change in the longer term, but the AAT have confirmed that they will give us plenty of notice if they're going to change this pre-release scenario that we've been given. So hopefully for all of you, this will be the scenario that your assessment will be based on. Certainly for at least the next 12 months, there definitely aren't any changes. Following that, we don't know if or when it might change. So the pre-release material, we're given some background on the organisation. We're given a little bit of history. And that background will give us an idea as to how long they've been operating for. Are they an established organisation? Do we expect them to be fairly refined in their processes and systems? We probably do if they've been around for quite a long time. It gives us an idea of their size, their structure, and their systems that they've got in place. And nicely, it gives us a bit here about this is where we're coming from a sustainability point of view. Information like this, we just want to bear in mind when we're answering our questions in the exam. It may not be that there's a question specifically about sustainability, but if we're making recommendations, we need to bear in mind what their stance is in relation to sustainability. We're looking at Green Print Limited. They sell new and recycled printer cartridges. So we can have a think about the kind of costs that they might be incurring, the sort of assets that they might have, and how flexible they might be to changes, how dynamic their industry might be. Changes in technology will obviously have quite a big impact on their organisation because they're providing these cartridges for printers. There also mention here of recycling. We might need to think about what that might mean in terms of quality and demand. We can think about their types of costs. Are they going to be predominantly variable costs? Are there going to be many fixed costs that they're going to be incurring? Think about how they might receive their money. We're given a bit of information about their customers and how they might pay, how we sell our goods to them. We might need to think about those different customer groups that we've got. Printer cartridges, they're going to be holding inventory. What's their approach to inventory? We're given a little bit of information here. Over the page, we're told a bit about their goals and objectives and what's important to them. There's a bit of a balanced scorecard analysis done down here. We've got the 4 different perspectives. We've also got an idea of where the business is looking to go longer term, and their market in which they operate. So there's some great information given there that you really need to know and understand. We're also given information about some staff. You need to know who these people are. When you're asked a question in the exam and you're told it comes from Miles Harper, he's the chief accountant. So you can think about the knowledge that he might have, the understanding that he might have. The way in which you present your answer to the chief accountant might be different to how you'll present your answer to the warehouse manager, who may not have that financial or that accounting background, and therefore you need to give more detailed explanations too. So make sure you know who these people are. So if you're receiving a request or information from them, you know where it's come from, what they might know, or if you're providing information, you need to know what are their interests and what's their level of knowledge and understanding. We've then also got the financial statements. So we've got December 2005. In the unseen information, we might be given an additional year's worth of information, or we might be given some more detailed information in relation to these. But we've got their profit or loss and also their statement of financial position. Have a work through these and see what ratios you can calculate. What do they tell you? Generally, ratios on their own, they don't mean much. So maybe look at them together with each other and be prepared for more information to be given in the exam that you might then use those ratios alongside. So we'll go back to our slides. Now we've had a brief look at that pre-seen information. And that's definitely something to have a good look through in the exam. So let me get to the slide we were on. So there's a couple more things that I'd like to talk about. The tasks in the assessments, the grading of the assessment, and a little bit about how you prepare for the written tasks. So the format of the assessment, you've got 6 tasks in this assessment, and there's a slide here which shows the kind of things that will be tested in each of the tasks. Again, this list isn't definitive, it just gives us an idea of some of the things that could be tested in each of those tasks, and the marks that are allocated to them. Now, question 1 will be multiple choice questions, it will be drag and drop, gap fill, the kinds of questions that can be automatically marked. Also, question 5, the ratios. Gap fill again, calculating ratios, and multiple choice kind of questions, multiple response questions to analyse and understand those ratios. The other tasks, tasks 2, 3, 4 and 6, they are going to have written elements. They may be dominated by written elements, so there might be some gap fills and some calculations in there, but also lots of written tasks. Now, I'm sure lots of you have noticed, now that those of you that have already sat some assessments at level 4, you've probably noticed that they're much more difficult than level 3, and there's quite a big jump up, and the style of questions is much less predictable. At levels 2 and level 3, questions follow kind of a similar format from sitting to sitting, whereas at level 4, the questions that we can see can be completely different to any kind of question that we've ever seen before. And this is intentional. The Level 4 exam is challenging. It's meant to be a step up, and it is going to be more difficult. And it's really going to test you on your understanding of the content of the syllabus. It's going to test your understanding of topics and techniques, not just how to apply them, but do you really understand what they're doing, what they're telling us, and what comes out of them. So the way in which you might be expected to apply your knowledge might be very different to anything that you've seen before. If you're well prepared though, if you understand the syllabus, you know what we're doing and why we're doing it, and the aims and objectives of all of the techniques that you've learnt, then a question being asked in a different style, you just need to make sure that you read it well. Read the question, read it again, what is it that they want, and then think about my knowledge that I've learnt, how can I answer that question, how can I apply it? So there's no standard style of question. Tables that you might have to fill out might be very different to what you've ever seen before. There will be perhaps writing a report, preparing a memo, briefing notes. Your written task might be quite long, lots of things that you need to cover in your response. The other thing to bear in mind is anything can be tested. So something which seemed fairly small and insignificant within the syllabus might be tested in a really big way. So benchmarking, which we see, it's not a huge topic in our management accounting papers, but we could find that we've got a 20-mark question in task 4 that's all focused around benchmarking. It could be pricing. We've got a 20-mark question there, which is about the way in which we price our products and the impact that has on our profits, the impact it might have on decisions that are being made. So a small topic could be tested in a big way. So don't leave anything to chance, and bear in mind anything could be tested. Formats will vary. The way information is presented to you. You could be presented with a budget in a format that you've not seen before, and you may have to step back from it and think about what is it that I'm actually given here. Question types that you've not seen before, particularly written responses. So you could be asked to prepare something like briefing notes, and you may not have seen briefing notes before. It's thinking about who is it I'm providing them to, for what purpose, what information would they need. As I mentioned, small topics could be a big question. Application and context. Whatever you're being asked to talk about, you've got to think about it in terms of Green Print Limited. What does it mean to them? How would they implement it? What effect would it have on their staff, on their market, their products, their costs? An integrated approach, we've mentioned that a couple of times. We've got to think about the impact of a decision that we make or that we recommend on people, costs, systems, performance. We've got to think about the bigger picture. Which this really helps to set us up for actually working out there in the real world. If we think about in an organisation, we could be presented with the unexpected, and we're expected to be able to deal with it. We need to think about it in terms of our organisation and make the necessary decisions. And so this assessment is all helping to prepare us for that. Now, I mentioned that we needed 70% to pass this assessment. With the new AQ16 syllabus, we've got our grading, which is a great addition to this new syllabus, that we can actually see how well we've done. We get a percentage, and we can also have a pass, a merit, or distinction, depending on that percentage that we achieve. I've also popped here the contribution that each of the units make towards the final grade for your level 4. So we can see here that the budgeting, decision and control, and financial statements of limited companies, they each contribute 15% towards our final grade. The Synoptic assessment has by far the biggest contribution. That's accounting for the accounting systems and control unit. That's the contribution of that unit towards the final assessment, plus we're being tested again on budgeting, decision and control, and limited companies. The optional papers, they've got much less of a contribution towards that final grade, just at 10% there. Now, it is possible to resit assessments in order to improve your grade. So if you're maybe a few marks off a distinction, you might choose to resit one of your assessments to improve your final grade. It's worth bearing in mind the contribution towards that final grade each of the assessments make. Now, I've put here an example of a task. I'm not going to read through this task in detail and go through everything. It was just really to give you an idea as to how a task might be presented in the exam and what's expected of you. So Greenprint Limited here has acquired a smaller competitor, Printwell Limited, and we're given some information about Printwell. So this is the company that they've acquired, and we've got their budgets. We've also got some details of the assumptions that were made when their budget was prepared. So we're given quite a bit of information that we need to read through. This information would be available in the assessment as pop-up windows as well. We'd need to bear in mind when we're going through this that this is a smaller competitor that Greenprint Limited have acquired. So this would be now adding to their organisation, to their business. And this was just part of the requirements for this task, which was to prepare a report to Miles Harper, the chief accountant. If the question didn't say that he was the chief accountant, we'd be looking back to the pre-scene to see who he is in the organisation. And we've got to cover a number of areas. We can see here this is a multi-part question. We're given information about how many marks were available for each part. We would need to structure our report to make sure it covers all of these parts and make sure that we're giving enough information that is going to cover the whole of that part of the requirement in order to pick up enough marks. So the first one there, examine the planning assumptions made and explain any weaknesses in these assumptions. A multi-part question. If there's an and, we've got two things that we need to answer, or perhaps more than two things, we'd need to make sure that we address all of those. So what are the planning assumptions? We need to find those. What weaknesses are there in them? We need to address both parts. We are writing to the chief accountant, so we can assume a level of knowledge. If we were writing a report to someone who perhaps is a non-accountant, we'd need to think about how detailed our explanations need to be. We need to go back to basics, perhaps. We've got explain the benefits, explain the motivation impact of the budget, explain how the stage of the product life cycle affects the budget preparation. All of these, they're talking about explaining. It's going into detail. It's not just giving one or two words as an answer. One sentence isn't going to be enough. It needs a full explanation. We need the reader of our answer to understand what each of these things are. So multi-part questions, they could be assessing a number of different areas of any of the syllabus for any of the units, and they might be picking up on a relatively small area, the stage of the product life cycle. We need to think about this with regards to Printwell Limited. Where are they in what stage of their product life cycle might they be at? What could we expect to be happening? So we need to think about these questions in the context of the scenario that we're given in the pre-scene and any additional information. I like to use this when I'm preparing a written answer. So make a point, explain a point, and apply a point. Make sure that we write enough. You may have heard, hopefully you heard me start to talk about benchmarking is a comparison tool. That would be making a point, explaining the point, going on to explain the types of benchmarking and what the benefits and drawbacks of benchmarking would be. Applying that, then talking about it specific for Green Print Limited. So how would they implement it? What would their benefits be from implementing benchmarking? Make a point, explain a point, and apply a point is really useful to make sure you write enough. So hopefully that's beneficial. The next couple of slides I have are just to talk about the Synoptic Schedule. This is available on the AAT website. They update it at the moment. We've got it through to December. I think we might now have the next 2018 dates through. Planning for your synoptic assessment is really, really important. We have these weeks when the professional synoptic assessment is available. Your training provider or your assessment centre may not be running those weeks, so you need to check in advance. You'd also need to check that they're running them every day. Some may be choosing just to run 2 or 3 days of that week. Also, how many places they've got available. They may book up quickly. I would imagine the synoptic assessment day in July would be very busy. It's kind of at the end of the college year and may well be booked out well in advance. So make sure you think about when you want to sit your assessment and you plan it well in advance. So to summarise the assessment, it's a 3-hour assessment. You'll be presented with a range of tasks and there will be a lot of written element in those tasks. You need to be able to explain financial information to non-accountants. So you need to be able to go back to basics. You need to make no assumptions, fully explain what it is that you're saying. So making sure that someone who isn't an accountant could understand what you're telling them. You're encouraged to work through the tasks in order. We normally say, do the tasks in whichever order you feel comfortable with, but for this synoptic assessment, you are advised to work through them in order. This is because it's all based on the same scenario, and there could be information that you're given in a later task that they don't want you kind of thinking about when you're doing an earlier task. It wouldn't be beneficial to you to start trying to pull that information into an earlier task. It might make it too complicated, or it may not be as easy to answer. So work through these tasks in order. Preparing for your synoptic assessment, study your accounting systems and control unit as if it has its own unit assessment. So study it in full. Work through everything. Have your scenario alongside you, the pre-release material, so you can be thinking about in terms of that scenario, but make sure you learn the accounting systems and control unit and dedicate the time to it that you would for any other unit. Revise through the core papers. Go back through the topics, the techniques that you've learned. Don't leave anything to chance. Go through your course file and think about everything. How could it apply? If you're doing the audit as an option, you might want to do this first, or you might want to study it first without necessarily sitting the exam. Spend time on the pre-release. Do calculations, apply techniques, engross yourself within that organisation, and practice questions. Practice questions is the way to prepare for this exam. Unfortunately, the sample assessments are based on a different scenario, so they are useful. Definitely go through them. You can see the types of questions that are asked, the types of additional information that you're given, but they're not going to be based on the same pre-release material. However, your materials that you receive from your training provider should have some mock exams, some practice tasks that can be based on Green Print Limited. So for us, within our materials, we've got lots of practice questions and mock exams. When you are practicing these questions, just bear in mind, though, the additional information that you're given in the mocks is unseen information that won't come up in the real exam. So you have to kind of do that mock exam and then forget everything that you've been told in it and just focus back on that pre-release material. So hopefully there's some useful information there that will help you to prepare for your exam or maybe understand a little bit more about your synoptic assessment. I am sorry for losing you for a couple of minutes there, but I'm going to stay around for sort of 10 minutes or so for if anyone's got any questions at all.